Thank you, Simon. Well, my preferred way of looking at ideologies that I find very useful is, instead of using the traditional left-right spectrum, is to look at what I call the degree of emotional infantilization on one side to responsible adulthood on the other side. And actually, amazingly, all of the political ideologies, religions, and even many lifestyles can be put into the single system, which is what I really like. And anytime you have a really good system, very interesting insights come up. So what does infantilization versus adulthood look like? So infantilization, actually that starts with adulthood. Typically adulthood would be, responsible adulthood is that you look at things logically, you take considered decisions, you don't get smitten too much by the raw emotions and do some ill thought out of things that later then you will regret. While infantilization, on the other hand, is about being prone to emotional outbursts, where you do it because it feels right, and you ignore longer term consequences of your actions. And as you can clearly see, the political right tends to be closely correlated with a more of adulthood, like on fiscal policies, on a bunch of others. We just resist not to do a lot of things like excessive government spending just because it would make us feel right in the moment, and it's compassionate right now, like here is this pain with this person, and then we just throw the logic and all of the common sense out of the window just to make sure that we reduce his pain right now, which is really, when you think about it, it's a bit like what drug dealers do. You give a person heroin and you will make him feel better for the next few hours, but then never mind what will happen with the rest of the person's life, and probably many of them will be dead a few years later. But that is like, so these things tend to matter much less to the part of the political spectrum that is infantilized. Now, so within this scale, libertarianism is actually the ultimate embodiment of the responsible adulthood. There's really, by most measures, probably I cannot think of anything that's even more emotionally adulthood than libertarianism, because it implies taking full responsibility for your life and then trying to make as few mistakes as possible, but then we do make a mistake, you take full responsibility for it, you don't blame somebody else, and you don't immediately run for somebody else to rescue you or to bail you out, which is what responsible adults do. Unfortunately, most of the world right now is not that. We just have to accept that this fact. Most of the people are much more infantilized. They always, if something bad happens to them, whether of their own doing or not, there's always somebody else to blame. They always look for government, for rescue, for welfare, for jobs, for this and for that. And as a result of that, it's a system that breeds ever greater degree of infantilization. And in fact, you might notice strong correlation between urban centers, how they vote politically, and rural areas. Because when you are in a, basically, the more restricted and regimented is your life, the more infantilized you will be. Because number one, you will not be given a lot of opportunities to think independently and show initiative. And also, in many cases, you will be explicitly prevented from showing initiative. So when you live in a city with a lot of people all around you, number one, there are many more authorities to fix whatever is wrong, but also, just as importantly, even when sometimes you see a problem and you want to fix it, there will be a lot of rules and regulations preventing you from doing that. So most people take just an easy street and say, okay, well, I'm not permitted to do so, I'll just go with the flow and I'll basically adapt and I will just become the part of the crowd and do whatever I'm told, and that's precisely what makes us infantilized. And that's why if you look at the political, and then if you look on the rural areas where you have there is less help around when something goes wrong, so it forces you into a position that you are responsible for fixing the problems, and also fewer people to prevent you from fixing your own problems. So therefore, if you look at the political map, and that's universal, United States, United Kingdom, any other country that I can think of, you will see that dense urban centers will be where the power centers of the political left, and much more sparsely populated rural areas will be always voted predominantly for the political right. I don't think there are any exceptions in any country to that. And therefore, if we set up our expectation as libertarians that somehow we can achieve the situation where the majority of population will choose to vote for the political system, whereby the libertarian standards of living will become the norm, that's setting yourself up for disappointment. That just too many people are too infantilized to go for it. Too many people are insecure, and too many people are never really had the taste of what it feels like to be a responsible adult. They only know that they feel insecure, they feel infantilized. If there is a problem, there's always some, parent figure like government that will maybe or maybe not will do something for you in that respect. And too many people just get into this habit of living this life that unless something really strong nudges them out of it, we should not really expect any meaningful shift out of this state. And since all of us have only one life, and I personally feel that it's important to live your life to the fullest, so be as ambitious as you can, but at the same time choose your objectives realistically, something that you can actually have a good chance of achieving within the limited amount of time. Then for me, hoping that libertarians will become the norm of life if we just tell people about it. To me, I just don't like the odds of success for that. So what I did instead, I took a comprehensive look at what are the biggest, most fundamental, the most systemic obstacles toward where all of us in this room, including me, would like to end up with. And what I realized that actually one of the biggest obstacles is a centralized state, the structure, because nothing is as infantilizing, as restricting personal initiative as it is centralized state, where you have the single center, small number of people to whom most of us don't and never will have access in our lives, making the decisions that are then uniformly imposed on tens of millions of people, like it is in this country, 65 million people population. And there is very little we can do about it, because if you want to change any kind of law, it's such a long and arduous process. It could take years and years and years to get even really minor reforms passed. And if you want to achieve something really big, then numbers just don't add up. It takes much too long. By the time you make even a slightest dent, you are retired or dead. And this just wasn't appealing to me. So the next question I asked myself is, what are the biggest factors that really make people so infantilized and so willing to vote for the daddy figure, the political left? And it's really the insecurity. Some people say that the incomes are stagnant and this and that in this country, but actually the biggest problem is not the size of the incomes. It is, by the world standards, is one of the highest, but it's a cost of living, which in this country especially is way out of control, much more so than in most other countries. And now if you look at if you look at the fundamental root causes of the main drivers of what makes the cost of living so high, eventually you come up with only three independent. Everything else is a consequence of those three. One is cost of taxes, another one is cost of unnecessary regulations, and the third one, a bit less obvious, is actually cost of property. And this is how it works. Anything you buy from companies which basically have to pay enough money for their employees so that after taxes they have still decent lifestyle, which means the higher are the tax rates, the more company has to pay to those employees so that after taxes they still have enough money to live on. And there's only one place to get that money from, is to raise the prices on everybody who's buying the product. And of course all companies are in the same position, because tax rates, the individual income tax rates that all employees pay are the same for everybody in the same country. And regulations, the same thing. Regulations means that it takes more people and more effort to produce the same output, whether it's an object or a service, which again means prices are raised for whatever we buy. And the third one, property, it inserts itself in many different ways. Number one, if you have business premises, you have to rent them, and the more expensive is the property, the more you have to pay in rent, which again you pass on to your customers, those costs. And the same thing when you pay your employees, the same thing. A significant chunk of their cost of living will be paying for their lodgings, which means again the more expensive is a property, the more you have to pay to your customers, who then have to pay taxes, etc., so that afterwards they can still afford to live in some decent, or at least have decent place. So these are the three things. And what I did next, I focused on this last part, and what is it precisely that's making price of property, especially in this country, so out of control. And it turns out that this has been a chronic problem that goes back decades in this country, the chronic underbuild. And one of the most politically tricky obstacles to solve in terms of the amount of construction, it's not the only obstacle, but the one that is considered politically the most tricky to solve, is commonly known as NIMBYism, which basically means every time you want to build a house, you have to put it somewhere, and more likely than not, somebody already living right next to it. And when you think about it, if you already live here, it makes absolutely perfect logical sense for you to object to propose new construction within where you live. There is absolutely no benefit to you. It's only downside, because that it either caps the further increase in the value of your property, or there will be even more, more crowded GP surgeries, local schools, more local traffic. There is really, in most cases, absolutely no tangible benefit to existing residents to want to permit new development. And since everybody who lives somewhere is an existing resident somewhere, that basically pretty much anywhere in this country, especially the most popular areas, it's difficult to get new construction done. As a result of that, year after year, decade after decade, there's been a severe lag in the rate of construction versus where it should be if we just look at the statistics of the increase of the population in this country. So my next question was, what would need to happen to make existing residents to want to permit new development in their area? And what I realized that under the current highly centralized system, where 95% of all taxes go straight to the central government, and local governments have very little leeway to do most of the things, the solution doesn't exist. However, if we were to shift to a model which is much more like Switzerland, where about 40% of taxes are paid within really your local area called the commune, so that's typically between a few hundred up to 2,000 people, 40%. Another 40% to canton, which is basically like a small English county equivalent, and only 20% to the federal government, versus 95% to the central government in this country. So it's totally opposite side of the spectrum. Under those conditions, actually a lot of interesting things would become possible, because then, if the local government has a lot of power to manage things more effectively, and by building more houses, they bring in more taxpayers, who then are gainfully employed and everything, then all of a sudden, actually, one of the really tangible benefits for the local existing residents would be reduced tax rates. And we're not talking £5 a year reduction, we're talking about thousands of pounds realistically achievable, because right now under this current centralized system, the wastage by the centralized government is enormous. And even then they find really difficult to cut in even just a tiny bit corners. The current system doesn't allow that flexibility. So under this different system, all of a sudden a lot of very exciting things would be possible that currently under the current system are just completely out of question, totally impossible to achieve. And one of them, for example, really exciting one, is if we look at the north-south economic divide and London property crisis, which actually systemically they are, as I will explain in a minute, they are very closely related to each other. Basically what happens is, let's take a situation, let's say I'm a business owner and I'm considering opening a new factory or branch of company somewhere within the UK. I will look north and south, east and west, and what I will realize actually, well, tax rates are the same everywhere, regulations are the same, practically identical everywhere, but there's more crime in the north, not quite as nice. London is a nicer place, my employees probably will like it, so what happens? The most natural logic, the most natural choice would be, just like most of them end up doing, is to move to London, which then creates this thing where London is considered the economic engine of the country, and huge swaths of the rest of the country are permanently economically depressed. And as a result of that, you have this situation where the North permanently underachieves its full potential and is in need of a huge amount of welfare money. To get that money, central government overtaxes the economically productive Southeast, so everybody loses, but in a very different way. And as far as London property prices are concerned, since London is the place to be if you have any kind of ambition, London is basically the place where good salaries, good wages are. So anybody who wants to make anything out of their life, no matter where they live, they will naturally be drawn to London. And right now, the main factor preventing even more people moving to London is because they know they won't be able to afford to live in London. Everybody knows what the prices are. And if the mayor of London were to actually succeed in his promise to build many more houses, which is a big if by itself, what would happen? The prices of property would temporarily dip, which then there would be a huge number of people who all of a sudden realize, actually, now I can't afford to move to London. So there would be this rush into London until, again, property prices come up to what I call the limit of unaffordability, as it chronically is these days. And so what will happen? Property prices in London will be even just as unaffordable, but most of the infrastructure would be in even more severe state, because under the current system, the transport links, the school places, the healthcare, the GP surgeries, everything else, they will not be upgraded in unison to take account of a greater number of people, which is happens to be another direct consequence of a highly fiscally centralized system. Because let's take some area somewhere in the UK, London or not London, doesn't matter, and what happens, and all of a sudden that area would dramatically increase its economic activities and would attract a lot of new people to move into that area, attracted by these economic prospects. Well, the fact is, since 95% of all taxes are collected centrally, which means all of this new money from taxing, all of this new tax revenue from taxing this new economic activity goes straight to the center, to the common pot, which then gets distributed under the old formula, which means the more successful local area becomes economically, by definition of this current system, they will be even more starved of funds needed to upgrade the infrastructure, all of the schools and GP surgeries and health and transport links and everything else that needs to be done. Because, number one, central bureaucrats are very inflexible in terms of reacting to changing circumstances, and number two, given the budget deficit that has been plaguing this country for many years, I mean, there is no way central government will ever go for giving more money that they already don't have enough of to any area. It's just not going to happen. So this really creates this funny situation where, if you take the metaphor of each local authority being like a person, then we end up with communism. You know, the communism, out of each according to abilities, to each according to your needs. So in this case, it would be out of each local authority according to the abilities in terms of how much money in taxes they pay to the center. But then it's even worse than communism, but then to each according to what some central, distant, unaccountable bureaucrat is willing to give you. It's even worse than communism. Yet this is how we live, and this is how people, at least for now, are accepting the situation. So these are really the major problems, major structural problems that for as long as this country stays so highly fiscally centralized, the solution just not possible, doesn't exist. You can put the most highly motivated, the most talented people in charge of the central government. They will fail inevitably because they would be put in charge of solving a problem that systemically is completely out of their power to solve. It's not a matter of talent, it's not a matter of willingness, it's just fundamental, it's like law of nature, not possible for them to do. So then what do politicians do? A small percentage of them, the idealistic ones, they try to continue fighting the windmills. Eventually they fail. But the smarter ones, the ones who look at the longer term personal career picture, they switch from managing results to managing expectations. And this is when you get this business as usual thing where you promise whatever to your people whose votes you want so that you get elected in the next round and the next round and the next round. And some people make decades-long career out of it and they're very successful. But the thing about modern world actually, and now we are living in one of those times when major metamorphosis is taking place in the Western world, something that happens once in a generation, once every few decades. The last one was in early 90s, early to mid 90s, and Bill Clinton was the biggest peak embodiment of it in the United States, and Tony Blair in the United Kingdom, which I would describe as a kind of policy of triangulation, where you are a smooth talker and you spin a lot and you try to please everybody and you make everybody believe that you are really good at what you do and that you really want to help everybody. Now the thing is that's unsustainable, and the thing about political models, sooner or later they outlive their usability and they lose their effectiveness. And right now we are transitioning, in the middle of transitioning into the new system that I would call the era of authentic politician. And that is why Jeremy Corbyn won twice leadership of the Labour Party. This is why Brexit referendum result was as it was. This is why Bernie Sanders, the unadulterated socialist in America, almost won Democrat Party nomination for the American presidency. And had it not been for a really dedicated effort of the Democrat Party machinery to sabotage his effort in every possible way, he would have been the nominee. And it's also about same thing about why Donald Trump got nominated by the Republicans and how he eventually managed to get elected by the country. All of these things are parts of the bigger picture. These are indications of the new trend that is still gaining momentum. We're nowhere near the end of it. And one of the underlying currents of this whole trend is really, I would say, has to do with people being fed up of not having enough control over their lives. Because when you think about it, in personal lives with Amazon and delivery on demand and everything, we are rapidly moving to the situation where at a personal level, whatever we want, we have a huge amount of choices and we can have it immediately or almost immediately. Which means that the dichotomy between what we can achieve in a personal or commercial life and the political life, which is hyper-centralized, is ever increasing. And people instinctively are feeling this difference. Most of them actually are not consciously aware what is it precisely that's sitting so badly with them. But one really interesting thing about the Brexit referendum, do you know what was the most influential slogan of the whole referendum that really was responsible for bringing the victory to the Leave side. It was take back control, vote Leave. Take back control. And people emotionally reacted to that even without maybe consciously realizing what they were thinking. And then all of these things about after, when people ask on the street, why did you vote for that? These phrases about I'm fed up with business as usual, all of those are really specific manifestations of this bigger trend. People want greater control. And that is why I believe that this shift to localism, where people would be personally much more empowered, would be wildly popular. And in fact, in the last, I came up with this idea, with the solution originally in the mid-2013. And since then, I've had conversations with about close to 800 people. A lot of them were ordinary people in this country, all the way up to conservative MPs and lords, well into double digits from that group. And if I, so far, after giving my full pitch within a few minutes, I haven't failed once to convince a person I was talking to that localism is really a vastly superior way to go forward for this country than to stay wedded to this hyper-centralized political system. Once you give them enough of the arguments about the drawbacks of the current system and the benefits of the new system, it becomes a no-brainer. Really, there was one person actually who was not convinced, but it was special circumstance. He was a tobacco company lobbyist. And he said that, and he's got a point actually, I agree with that. He said that I would rather negotiate with a single centralized authority than having to negotiate with a huge number of independent, much smaller authorities. And he's got a point. But for most of us, that's not an excuse that we would buy. But for his professional purposes, actually, that was a logical argument. We can't say otherwise. So what I've been doing for the last few years is promoting this and going up the ladder of the Conservative Party politicians because, well, number one, ideologically they are aligned with it. The only problem is the lack of specificity. They don't quite sure how to go about it, but they're definitely leaning in the right direction. And number two, they are in power. And for this really to become the law of the land and to really cause to become the reform that it should be, because it is it's a major reconstruction of the fiscal system in this country. And so basically, without the assent and support of the Prime Minister, the rest is not really that possible, because even when you talk to MPs, again, they're always looking at the boss. They might agree with you enthusiastically, but then they don't really make the next step. So Prime Minister is the key, and for the last few months, that has been my primary target of campaigning. So that is really the latest progress on that. So that's it. Now, if you have any questions.
But the central government won't be willing to give up power because that's a monopoly on the power and making decisions. Like it's just not natural to give up the power. Like you gotta put the man who's giving up the power in very special circumstances to make him give up the power. So
it's a very good question, and my pitch for the politicians at the top is right now you're being blamed for failing to make good on a lot of your promises, and the